A Nightmare on Elm Street is a supernatural slasher film directed by Wes Craven. The film follows a group of teenagers living in the suburbs. The fifth child murderer named Freddy Krueger begins to haunt the teenagers in their dreams. The film stars Robert Englund and marks the acting debut of Johnny Depp. Hey guys, welcome back to Garage Slasher-thon, where every day for the month of October, we revisit a slasher movie. Today we're talking about the original Nightmare on Elm Street, directed by Wes Craven. I remember watching a few of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies as a kid, and I kind of got introduced to Freddy Krueger through the goofier sequels and the Michael Bay remake. Those are the ones I was introduced to. One memory I especially have is in Nightmare on Elm Street. I think it was Dream Child, if that was the title. There's a scene where the woman is having a nightmare that she's being force-fed by Freddy Krueger. And this was like in the later sequels when Freddy Krueger became a much more goofy character. He says, "Bon appetit, bitch." And that's like my biggest Nightmare on Elm Street memory from my childhood. But the original is not very much like the sequels or the remake by Michael Bay. The one thing that was introduced in the sequels and in the remake is that Freddy Krueger is actually a child molester, and in the original movie, he's just a child murderer. So the reason for that is apparently when the original script was written, they made him a pedophile, and then there was a real-life case of child molestation going around in the news, and they decided to cut that out just to remove any parallels between the true story. But then in subsequent sequels, they had no problem reintroducing that fact. It's really interesting how this movie came to be, because Wes Craven wanted to make this movie, and a lot of people thought it was unmakeable. A lot of people just thought that it's too much supernatural stuff. It's going to be really hard to pull off. There's a lot of talk about dreams, and just think of a movie like Inception, how that kind of thing is hard to pull off. It really takes skill to blend reality with dream worlds. So a lot of people told Wes Craven that it's not really a feasible movie, but he went to make it anyway. Wes Craven drew a lot of inspiration from conflicts overseas in Vietnam and Cambodia. He read this article about how when Cambodians would flee to America to escape revolutionary dictatorship, when they fled, there was a lot of cases of Asians just dying in their sleep, and they called it Asian death syndrome, which is an outdated term. No one really calls it that anymore. But anyway, the reason being is because these people had so much PTSD that they'd have these really intense nightmares and they would die from basically a heart attack. And that really fascinated Wes Craven because he was like, sleep feels like a very comfortable state where not much can go wrong. Imagine someone who's just haunting you in your dreams. So that was kind of the inspiration for Freddy Krueger being this man who haunts you in your dreams, and when you're asleep, it's very hard to escape your sleep. There's a lot of personal connections with Wes Craven's life. Apparently, Elm Street is the street he went to college on. His college was on Elm Street, and also the name Freddy Krueger is the name of a bully he had in his childhood. So he put in these little details from his own personal life. I think this is one of the slasher movies that holds up the best. This is really fun to watch. Some of my favorite slasher movies are the ones that kind of mix two genres together. I just like the idea of mixing genres together. Like Alien is a slasher movie mixed with a sci-fi. And this movie is a slasher movie mixed with a fantasy movie, because the rules of reality are completely warped because these people are being haunted in their dreams. So it makes for some very interesting commentary and some very interesting kills as well, which is what you watch a slasher film for at the end of the day. The one thing that really is impeccable about this movie, the one thing that goes unnoticed, is its editing. The way characters fall asleep and wake up and all of a sudden they're in the dream world, but they don't tell you that right away. It's like gradually things start becoming a little more strange, a fog starts showing up, these little things around start making less sense, and all of a sudden you realize you're in a dream world. The movie never overtly tells you, doesn't give you like a visual cue as to when you're in the dream world. You kind of just gradually enter the dream world, which is very fun to watch. And it's just proved that really good editing goes a long way. It kind of reminds me of, again, going back to Inception, when they talk about just small details in the back not making sense. This is kind of what this movie does. It starts with those little creepy details not quite making sense, and then Freddy Krueger shows up and you're like, okay, yeah, this is a dream. I really like how this movie pulls off the mix between reality and dream state. The practical effects are what really makes this movie. This was a pretty high budget film, but they still used a lot of practical effects because at the time that's all you have. I just looked at some of the behind the scenes of this movie, and it's really crazy how they pull some of this stuff off. The one that everyone goes back to is the one scene where Freddy Krueger appears from behind the wall. That's actually just a bed sheet and very dark lighting. They are able to pull that off. There's also the hand popping out of the bathtub scene, which apparently they had a set that was built over a swimming pool, and that's how they were able to pull that scene off, which is pretty crazy. And one scene I really like is the scene where one of the teenagers, Johnny Depp's character, gets killed. He sinks into the bed, and the bed spits out blood like a volcano. It kind of has this weird anti-gravity feeling, and they just took a set, put all the props upside down, and then filmed the scene, and it really comes out looking pretty good. So yeah, that's kind of what I like about the movie, is really that sense of dread that someone is haunting you in your dreams. And your dreams are very inescapable. You can't help but dream. It's not something you have control over. And you can try to stay awake for as long as possible, but after a while, you're going to need some shut-eye. It makes for a very inescapable scenario, which is the perfect scenario for a slasher movie, is not being able to escape. There are a few scenes I think are goofy in retrospect. The one scene in particular is fucking Freddy Krueger is Mr. Fantastic, and his arms are very long. That's your introduction to Freddy Krueger, and it's kind of a weird introduction, if I do say so myself. Once you get to understand the character of Freddy Krueger, that he is a bit more of a Pennywise the clown character, just this character with a weird sixth sense of humor, it makes more sense, but just as your first visual of Freddy Krueger, it's a bit off-putting. And speaking of Freddy Krueger, he's the iconic villain here. He's played by the great Robert Englund, who is a horror icon at this point, not just for this movie, but a lot of other movies. He's just the right amount of funny in this movie. It's like Pennywise in the original It movies. He is terrifying, but he's also got that good sense of humor. Obviously, with later iterations, they made him a bit too funny, because that's what people wanted to see, a very charismatic Freddy Krueger just killing people. And then in the Michael Bay one, I find they made him way too serious. So this one strikes the perfect balance. I think this one is a really good one. And to be honest, a lot of the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels are pretty good in my opinion. It's not something like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre where it was just lightning in a bottle and they were never able to recreate that despite numerous sequels. Same thing with the Halloween movies, arguably. Nightmare on Elm Street, I think, has a pretty good run because you get horror movies. I think Freddy's Revenge is pretty lame. Yeah, some of the later sequels, especially like Dream Child, are a bit stupid. But Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, is a really good sequel. And I would even argue that New Nightmare is one of my favorite sequels. It kind of goes more down the Scream route, but I like it for that. It's a weird twist on it. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm not the biggest Wes Craven nut. Of the horror directors that I usually talk about on this channel, John Carpenter, Sam Raimi, he's one of the ones I gravitate a little less to, but it's because I'm not as familiar with his filmography. Of course, I've seen this movie, I've seen Scream. He's got really good movies, and I wish I could get more into him, but there's always something preventing me. I wish I could watch more of his movies, because this one here is truly a directorial movie. It's solely dependent on the director. Everything that he brings to the table, the visual effects, the performances, especially Freddy Krueger's performance, he really had his hand in the pie. And that's what makes this movie good, is that it feels like a true auteur film, but it's a slasher movie. I think when the movie came out, people viewed it as a slasher movie, just like some fun slasher movie. But as time progressed, people started reevaluating the movie and realizing that, wait, not only is this a good slasher movie, it's just a good movie. It's really well edited, well paced. Everything about it feels very polished and neat and to a crisp. That's what I like about the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, especially the first one. Guys, have you seen Nightmare on Elm Street, the original one? Did you like it? Comment below, let me know, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for more Garage Slasher-thon. Take care.
From Wes Craven, director of The Hills Have Eyes and Last House on the Left, a new masterpiece in fantasy terror, Nightmare on Elm Street.